In this video, we're going to explore 20 incredible inventions from the Roaring Twenties that have since disappeared. First, crystal radios. Remember those old movies where someone frantically twists dials on a radio trying to catch a faint signal? Well, that wasn't just Hollywood magic, it was the reality of crystal radios in the 1920s. These nifty little gadgets were like the smartphones of their day, except way simpler. Picture this: a small wooden box with a coil of wire, a crystal, and a thin metal wire called a cat's whisker. No batteries, no plugs, just the power of radio waves. You'd carefully position the cat's whisker on the crystal, and suddenly, voices and music would come through your headphones. It was like catching whispers from the air. Second, phonographs. From crystal radios to room-filling melodies, the 1920s saw a musical revolution right in people's living rooms. Ever wondered what it felt like to gather around a machine that could summon any song at will? Enter the phonograph, the great-granddaddy of your record player. Picture this. It's a cozy evening in the 1920s, and the family gathers around a large wooden cabinet. Inside sits a phonograph, ready to fill the room with music. These machines were like giant brass flowers, with huge horns to amplify the sound. Loading a record was an event in itself. You'd carefully place a thick, heavy disc on the turntable, wind up the machine, and gently lower the needle. Now, the sound quality wasn't exactly crystal clear. It was a bit scratchy and tinny compared to what we're used to now, but back then, hearing music in your own home was nothing short of miraculous. And get this, phonographs weren't just for playing tunes. People used them to record and play back their own voices too. Imagine hearing your great-grandparents as kids. Third, manual adding machines. While folks were getting a kick out of their newfangled phonographs, another invention was revolutionizing offices across America. Ever wonder how people crunched numbers before calculators? Well, let us introduce you to the unsung hero of 1920s bookkeeping, the manual adding machine. These mechanical marvels were like the heavyweight champions of math. Weighing in at a whopping 20 to 30 pounds, they weren't exactly portable. But boy, did they pack a punch when it came to number crunching. Imagine a device that could slice your bookkeeping time in half. That's exactly what these machines did, allowing accountants to zip through long columns of numbers faster than you can say, tax season. Fourth, silent film cameras. Just as adding machines were transforming offices, another invention was silently revolutionizing entertainment. Can you imagine a blockbuster movie without a single line of dialogue? In the 1920s, that wasn't just possible. It was the hottest thing in town. Picture this: a massive, boxy camera sitting on a tripod with a poor soul cranking it by hand to capture the action. These silent film cameras were quite the spectacle themselves. But here's the kicker. They were so noisy that directors had to shout instructions over the grinding gears. Talk about a workout for both arms and vocal cords. Now, you might be thinking, how did they tell a story without any sound? Well, that's where the magic happened. Actors became masters of exaggeration, using their faces and bodies to convey every emotion. It was like watching the world's most elaborate game of charades, only on the big screen. 5. Carbon arc lamps. While silent films were dazzling audiences, another invention was lighting up the night in a whole new way. Ever wonder how they made those movie sets shine so bright? Get ready to meet the unsung hero of the silver screen that brought a touch of lightning to every set. In the 1920s, carbon arc lamps were the brightest stars in town, quite literally. These bad boys worked by creating an electric arc between two carbon electrodes, producing a light so intense it could turn night into day. Imagine having a piece of the sun at your fingertips. But here's the kicker. Operating one of these lamps was like conducting a mini lightning storm. Workers had to constantly adjust the carbon rods as they burned away, keeping the arc just right. It was a high-maintenance affair, but boy, was it worth it. 6. Vacuum tube radios. If you thought those high-maintenance arc lamps were a handful, Wait until you hear about the next big thing that had everyone's ears perked up. In the 1920s, vacuum tube radios burst onto the scene, bringing the world into living rooms across America. These weren't your great-grandkids' pocket-sized gadgets. We're talking about hefty machines that cost around $200, which was no small change back then. Picture this. You've just settled in for the evening, ready to catch the latest news or tune in to your favorite show. But first, you had to fire up that radio and wait for it to warm up. Yep, these babies needed time to get going, kind of like an old car on a chilly morning. And boy, did they guzzle electricity. You'd better believe your power bill wasn't too happy about it. 7. Ice boxes. While families were gathering around their radios, another revolution was silently chilling in the kitchen. Ever wondered how folks kept their milk from spoiling before electricity came along? Well, let's crack open the fascinating world of ice boxes and the unsung heroes who kept them running. Imagine a wooden cabinet in your kitchen, lined with tin or zinc, with a big block of ice sitting at the top. That's right, we're talking about ice boxes, the cool ancestors of our modern fridges. But using one of these was no walk in the park. Families had to deal with melting ice, catch drips in pans, and mop up water pooling underneath. It was a daily dance to keep food fresh and prevent spoilage. 8. Player pianos. Ever dreamed of being a piano virtuoso without the years of practice? Well, in the 1920s, that dream came true with the player piano. These weren't your grandma's regular pianos. They were magical music machines that could play tunes all by themselves. Picture this. You'd slip in a roll of perforated paper, pump the foot pedals, and watch in amazement as the keys danced up and down, playing complex melodies without a human finger in sight. It was like having a ghostly pianist right in your living room. Player pianos quickly became the life of every party. Families and friends would gather around, singing along to the latest hits or cutting a rug to some hot jazz tunes. And the best part, you could be the star of the show without knowing a lick about music. 9. Dictaphones. Ever wondered how people recorded their thoughts before smartphones? Well, in the 1920s, they had a nifty gadget called the dictaphone. It was like sending a voice message, but with a twist that would make your great-grandparents' jaws drop. These clever machines used a needle to etch sound waves onto a wax cylinder as you spoke into a large horn. Imagine the looks on people's faces when they first heard their own voices played back. It was like magic, even if the sound was a bit scratchy and tinny. Using a dictaphone was quite the process. You'd have to speak clearly into the horn, carefully pronouncing each word. Then, a typist would listen to the recording and type out what you said. It might seem like a hassle now, but back then, it was a game changer for businessmen and writers. 10th, hand-cranked cars. Ever thought starting your car could land you in the hospital? In the 1920s, that was a real possibility. Hand-cranked cars were the latest craze, but they came with a serious risk. Imagine walking up to your shiny new automobile, grabbing a hefty crank at the front, and giving it all you've got. Sounds simple, right? Well, not quite. These early cars didn't have the luxury of electric starters. Instead, drivers had to rely on their own muscle power to get the engine going. It was like playing a dangerous game of chance every time you wanted to hit the road. You had to turn that crank with just the right amount of force and perfect timing. Too little, and the engine wouldn't start. Too much, and you were in for a nasty surprise. See, if you weren't careful, that crank could suddenly kick back with incredible force. It earned the ominous nickname arm breaker for a good reason. Many unfortunate drivers found themselves nursing broken arms or worse after a crank gone wrong. Talk about a rough start to your day. 11th, spirit duplicators, ditto machines. While drivers wrestled with cranky engines, office workers were facing a different kind of challenge. Ever wondered why your grandparents get nostalgic about the smell of school handouts? The answer lies in a quirky 1920s invention that turned copying into a fragrant art form. Enter the spirit duplicator, the mad scientist of the office world. This contraption was like a magical potion-making machine, complete with special inks and alcohol-based fluids. Using one was a bit like being an alchemist in a lab coat. You'd start by creating a master copy, carefully typing or drawing with a special waxy ink. Then, you'd wrap this master around a drum filled with duplicating fluid, ready to work its magic. As the drum spun, it transferred the ink onto blank sheets, churning out up to 100 copies at a time. The result? Papers with a distinct purple hue and a sweet, intoxicating aroma that filled classrooms and offices. It was faster than using carbon paper, but still a far cry from today's instant digital printers. 12th, telegraph machines. Remember those old spy movies with coded messages? Well, the 1920s had their own version of secret communication, and it was tapping out a revolution. The telegraph machine was like the great-grandparent of texting, shrinking the world one dot and dash at a time. Picture this. Instead of thumbs flying over a smartphone screen, operators were tapping away on a big metal key. But here's the kicker. They weren't typing words. They were speaking in a rhythmic language called Morse code. Each tap sent an electrical signal zipping across wires, carrying messages faster than anyone could have imagined. On the other end, another operator would be listening intently, translating those clicks and clacks back into words. It was like a game of long-distance telephone, but with a lot more tapping and a whole lot less, "Can you hear me now?" 13th, soda fountains in drugstores. While telegraph operators were busy decoding dots and dashes, another group of skilled hands was crafting liquid magic. The local drugstore wasn't just for picking up prescriptions. It was the go-to spot for a sweet escape and a dash of community spirit. Picture this. A long counter lined with gleaming chrome stools, the air filled with the hiss of carbonation and the clinking of glass. Welcome to the soda fountain, the beating heart of 1920s social life. These fizzy havens weren't just about quenching your thirst. They were where you met your best friend for a gossip session, nervously sipped a float on your first date, or treated yourself after a long day at the office. And at the center of it all, the soda jerk, a master of mixology armed with an array of syrups, sodas, and a whole lot of flair. Ordering was an adventure in itself. Sure, you could play it safe with a classic root beer or cherry soda, but why not live a little? How about an egg cream? Don't worry, no actual eggs involved. Or a towering banana split. Each soda fountain had its own secret recipes, making every visit a unique experience. 14th, coin-operated phonographs. Ever wonder how people became the DJs of their own nights out in the 1920s? Well, grab a nickel and let's drop it into the fascinating world of coin-operated phonographs. These musical marvels were like vending machines for tunes, popping up in diners, dance halls, and bars across America. Imagine the thrill of walking up to one of these machines, scanning the selection, and picking your favorite song to play for everyone. But here's the kicker. These early music machines had a sneaky way of making you spend more. They'd only play one side of a record. If you wanted to hear the B-side, you'd have to dig into your pocket for another nickel. It was a clever trick that kept the music and the money flowing all night long. These musical vending machines weren't just about entertainment. They were changing the whole music scene. Suddenly, recorded music was more accessible than ever before. People could enjoy the latest hits without owning a phonograph at home. It was like having a miniature concert hall right there in your local hangout. 15th, Zeppelins, rigid airships. While coin-operated phonographs were changing the soundtrack on the ground, something equally revolutionary was happening in the skies. Ever imagined floating across the Atlantic in a luxurious hotel? In the 1920s, that dream became a reality, and it was wilder than you might think. Picture this. You're stepping onto a massive airship, a floating cigar in the sky that could carry up to 20 passengers in style. These weren't your average blimps. We're talking about Zeppelins, the granddaddies of air travel luxury. With dining rooms and lounges, these gentle giants made early planes look like cramped tin cans. But here's the kicker. These sky cruisers weren't just for show. In 1929, the Graf Zeppelin pulled off a mind-blowing feat, a round-the-world flight covering over 21,000 miles. It was like the moon landing of its time, proving that air travel could shrink the globe like never before. 16. Flash powder. Ever wondered how photographers captured those moody noir scenes before modern camera flashes? Well, hold on to your hats, because we're about to dive into the explosive world of flash powder photography. Back in the Roaring Twenties, taking a picture in low light was like setting off a mini fireworks display. Photographers would carefully measure out a mixture of magnesium powder and potassium chlorate onto a metal tray attached to their camera. When they were ready to shoot, they'd trigger this concoction, creating a brilliant burst of light that illuminated their subject. This flash powder revolution was a game changer for night photography and indoor shots. Suddenly, photographers could capture all sorts of scenes that were previously shrouded in darkness. It's like they flipped on a giant light switch for the entire world of photography. 17. Coal-fired irons. Ready to iron out some wrinkles in your knowledge of 1920s fashion? Prepare to be pressed with a surprising fact. Back then, looking sharp meant playing with fire, literally. Picture this. You're getting ready for a night out in the Roaring Twenties, but instead of plugging in your trusty iron, you're loading it up with hot coals. That's right. Coal-fired irons were the hot ticket for smooth clothes back in the day. These irons were like miniature stoves you could hold in your hand. You'd fill them with glowing coals or heated metal slugs, and voila, instant heat. But using one was no walk in the park. It was more like a game of hot potato mixed with a workout. You had to work fast before the iron cooled down, all while dodging potential burns and scorched clothes. Ironing day was a real sweat fest. Imagine juggling multiple irons, swapping them out as they cooled, all while standing next to a blazing stove. Talk about feeling the heat. It was especially grueling during those sweltering summer months. 18. Wind-up alarm clocks. Ever woken up to the gentle chime of your smartphone alarm? Well, back in the 1920s, mornings were a whole different ball game. Wind-up alarm clocks were the unsung heroes of punctuality, and boy, did they pack a punch. These little timekeeping champs required a nightly ritual. You'd wind them up, set the alarm, and hope for the best. As you drifted off to dreamland, the steady tick-tock filled your room like a lullaby with an attitude. But come morning, these clocks didn't just politely suggest you wake up. Oh no, they erupted into what one source described as a cacophony of ringing that could wake the dead. Talk about a rude awakening. But here's the kicker. These clocks weren't always the most reliable buddies. Sometimes they'd decide to take a snooze themselves, running fast, slow, or even conking out mid-snore. Imagine the panic of waking up, realizing your trusty timekeeper had gone AWOL, and you might have missed your train. 19th. Pneumatic tubes for messages. Ever imagined sending a message across a building faster than you could run there yourself? Well, in the 1920s, that's exactly what people were doing with pneumatic tube systems. These nifty networks of tubes used bursts of air to zip capsules containing messages or small items from one place to another. It was like having your very own indoor postal service, but way cooler. Picture this. You're working in a bustling 1920s department store. You need to send a message to the stockroom pronto. No problem. Just pop your note into a capsule, drop it into the tube, and whoosh! Off it goes, racing through the building at speeds up to 35 miles per hour. Talk about fast food for thought. These tube systems weren't just for stores, though. They were the unsung heroes of communication in all sorts of places. Banks, newspapers, you name it. They made it possible to send messages and small items zipping across entire cities. It was like a physical version of the internet, but with more satisfying sound effects. 20. Street corner shoe shine stands. Speaking of pressure, imagine having your first job involve shining shoes for some of the most important people in town. Think that sounds easy? Think again. These pint-sized entrepreneurs were about to teach us a thing or two about hard work and opportunity. Picture this. You're strolling down a bustling 1920s street, and there, on almost every corner, is a shoe shine stand ready to make your footwear sparkle. These mini stages of polish and pride were more than just a place to get your shoes cleaned. They were social hubs where folks caught up on local gossip or discussed the latest headlines. The typical shoe shine stand was like a tiny theater, with a raised chair for the customer and a lower seat for the shoe shine boy or man. Once you hopped up on that chair, you'd place your feet on the footrests and watch as the shiner worked their magic. These skilled artisans used a variety of tools, brushes, cloths, and polish, often employing techniques passed down through generations.